Hello, everyone. Today, we're diving into the reasons behind Rick Harrison's death penalty sentence. A tense trial and shocking revelations have completely shattered the image of the man once known as the King of Pawn Stars. The trial revealed why Rick Harrison faced the death penalty. Shocking disclosures about his actions and crimes have entirely transformed the image of the Pawn Stars King, leaving the public in disbelief. If you want to delve deeper into this shocking case, leave a comment with the number 1. If you think this is just a fictional case, leave a comment with the number 0. Don't forget to like and share this video so everyone can know about it. On the early morning of April 13, 2025, Las Vegas wasn't just buzzing with crowds flocking to casinos and the dazzling light shows along the Strip. The atmosphere around the Clark County Courthouse seemed thick with an unusual tension. A long line of reporters waited, camera lights flashing brightly before dawn. The crowd wasn't drawn by an ordinary lawsuit, but by a name familiar on screens worldwide for over a decade: Rick Harrison, the central figure of the Pawn Stars TV show. When Rick was led into the courtroom, hands cuffed and looking exhausted, the sharp, resolute image familiar from television was gone. In its place was a defendant with a bowed head, haggard and silent under the lenses that once hailed him as the King of the Pawn Shop. The courtroom was packed. Initial whispers quickly gave way to profound silence as the presiding judge announced the indictment, a nearly 200-page document charging Rick Harrison with 16 federal offenses. The prosecutor described the case as a tightly organized criminal enterprise, where every element, from the pawn shop, shell companies, to cash transactions through casinos, served a single purpose: human trafficking and exploiting people as commodities. According to the charges, Rick Harrison wasn't just a cog in this machine, but its architect, overseer, and guarantor of its continuous operation for nearly 5 years. Tension in the courtroom escalated as evidence was presented. Surveillance camera footage, Rick's handwritten notebook, encrypted emails, and testimonies from victims held in a dark room behind the pawn shop. Each piece of evidence was not just a legal fact, but a chilling piece in a larger, horrifying puzzle of a human trafficking network operating in the heart of modern America. The biggest shock came when the presiding judge read the preliminary verdict. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimonies, and the severe consequences for the victims, the court sentences the defendant, Richard Kevin Harrison, to death by lethal injection. The moment the verdict was announced, the courtroom seemed to freeze. A scream rang out from the audience section, later identified as coming from a mother of a missing victim. A juror dropped their pen. Reporters in the room immediately sent updates to their newsrooms. Rick didn't react, didn't protest, didn't plead for mercy. He simply closed his eyes as if he had anticipated this day. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered, banners reading "Justice for the Victims" stretching across the walkway. International media quickly jumped in. Major outlets like CNN, BBC, and Reuters ran headlines. Rick Harrison, from TV star to death row convict. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Rick Harrison death sentence garnered over 4 million mentions on social media. While some fans still clung to the belief that this was a misunderstanding, anti-trafficking organizations declared, "This is the first victory in a chain of crimes that must be exposed." What drove prosecutors to pursue the harshest penalty wasn't just the scale of the network, but the sophistication and ruthlessness in how Rick designed and managed the entire system. Every transaction was encrypted. Each victim was assigned a code. Any mistake was erased through disappearances. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was calculated, planned, and executed systematically. A criminal empire hidden under the glow of television, a senior FBI investigator remarked. The initial trial didn't just deliver a verdict. It flung open a door, revealing a chain of horrific events never before disclosed. Behind that door was not just Rick Harrison, but a silent power structure and mysterious figures who helped create a hell on the streets of Las Vegas. Rick Harrison was once the embodiment of the modern American dream, a high school dropout who started from nothing with his father by opening a small pawn shop in Las Vegas. He became a global TV star through his quick wit and captivating negotiation skills on Pawn Stars on the History Channel. The intense haggling, expert appraisals, and calls to specialists became his brand, captivating millions of American viewers for nearly 15 years. But at the height of the show's success, a secret network was being built behind the scenes. A second enterprise took shape, one not broadcast, with no audience, no laughter, but operating with the precision of a machine. It wasn't for trading antique watches or rare paintings, but for trafficking humans. In 2009, when Pawn Stars premiered, viewership skyrocketed. The gold and silver pawn shop, once an ordinary store in a rundown part of Las Vegas, began welcoming hundreds of customers daily. Revenue soared, licensing deals, TV contracts, advertisements, and merchandise poured in. Rick became a cultural icon, invited to speak at conferences, write books, sign autographs, and even dubbed the face of Las Vegas culture. However, that very fame inadvertently became the perfect cover for a criminal enterprise. Rick was no longer just a pawn shop owner. He had become a brand. Behind that brand's facade was a financial labyrinth. Every shady company and secret transaction served a clear purpose: profiting from human exploitation. Investigation records show that from 2016 to 2022, Rick Harrison led or indirectly controlled at least 6 shell companies. None engaged in transparent commerce. They had no websites, no real office addresses, no employees. Yet the bank accounts of each company received steady funds from mysterious partners in Serbia, UAE, Thailand, and Romania, with money funneled through a sophisticated multi-layered monetary system. This network was uncovered during a covert FBI operation called Pale Porn, launched in late 2021, following an unusual clue. A transportation payment receipt under the name RH Acquisitions LLC found in the records of a house where a trafficking victim was held. The receipt noted 1974 transportation and handling of antiques. It sounded like a shipment of antiques, but according to a surviving victim, antiques was a code word for people. From there, investigators began reconstructing the operation. They sifted through thousands of data entries, tracked transactions, planted undercover agents, and followed every lead from trading floors to gas stations. The result was a web-like network on a map, with Rick's pawn shop at the center, serving as a hub, cover, and site for illegal money laundering. A former FBI agent who investigated human trafficking at the Mexican border testified at a hearing. What made Rick Harrison's system so dangerous was not just its scope, but its legitimization. He used his own fame to neutralize suspicion, turning crimes into legitimate business operations. Reports from the Department of Homeland Security further revealed that Rick personally signed transportation contracts with suspected human traffickers under the guise of antique art deals. One contract, valued at $83,000 for a 19th-century African mask, was for an item that never appeared in the pawn shop's inventory. A shell company in Liechtenstein was listed as the buyer, but it had no real address. Rick even exploited Las Vegas's strategic position, with its robust casino and real estate infrastructure, as an ideal transit point for both people and money. In 1 month, he visited 5 casinos and conducted over 40 chip exchange transactions, withdrawing more than $350,000, a classic but highly effective money laundering technique. At the trial, the prosecutor presented a financial chart with Rick Harrison at the center. Each arrow represented a money flow, each square a shell company, each connection a victim stripped of identity. Every dirty dollar, no matter how many layers of shell companies it passed through, ultimately led back to the gold and silver pawn shop on Las Vegas Boulevard. The brutality lay not in the money but in the cold calculation. In this system, people were listed as commodities, assigned codes, priced, and traded like artifacts. Rick didn't just know this. He designed it. A former shop technician testified, "Some nights, I saw Rick come to the shop at 3 a.m. with a group of strangers. They weren't carrying antiques. They were bringing large wooden crates through the back door. When I asked what was inside, he said, 'Don't ask about things you're not allowed to understand.'" Rick's public image as a jovial father and shrewd negotiator was gradually being replaced by a darker one. The architect of an empire exploiting human beings, where laughter was merely a mask for the silence and cruelty beneath. The first clue didn't come loudly. It often begins with a vague testimony, an odd document, a seemingly insignificant detail. For the FBI, the origin of the Rick Harrison case didn't stem from the famous pawn shop or a clear accusation. It began with the missing person report of a 16-year-old girl, Jenna Morales, from Reno, Nevada. Jenna wasn't an exceptional case, at least not initially. She vanished after signing up for an online modeling program advertised on social media. Everything about the offer seemed professional. A sleek website, verified accounts, prompt responses, enticing language. The account even showcased images of collaborations with well-known brands, creating a perfect trap. Jenna was promised a photo shoot in Los Angeles with fully funded travel and accommodation expenses. The eager teenager boarded the last bus leaving Reno and was never heard from again. Most missing person reports fade into the thousands filed each year. But Special Agent Daniel Price, a veteran with over 12 years of experience dismantling human trafficking rings, sensed something was off. He decided to scrutinize every detail: Jenna's emails, bank records, her digital footprint in the 72 hours before she disappeared. The breakthrough came when he uncovered a small transaction. $1,000 sent from a Las Vegas account to an entity named RH Acquisitions, LLC, with a note for transportation and handling fees for rare goods. The phrasing seemed vague but not inherently illegal. What puzzled Price was why a company dealing in antique transport would receive money from a teenage girl signing up to model. He immediately searched federal records for RH Acquisitions and was shocked by the results. The registered owner was Richard Kevin Harrison, none other than Rick Harrison. Initially, Price suspected it might be a coincidence of names. But within 24 hours, verified connections emerged. The company's legal address matched a private storage facility in a Las Vegas suburb, indirectly owned by Rick through a parent company. The bank accounts aligned with income Rick reported on tax filings since 2017. Instantly, the case outgrew the scope of a routine missing person investigation. An internal file, coded OPA0193, was opened. Operation Pale Porn was established. The name was chosen deliberately to signify that sometimes the smallest porn sets can ignite a deadly game, and Rick the beloved TV personality, might be the mastermind behind it all. Within 8 weeks, the task force grew from 3 agents to a specialized unit, including Interpol, Homeland Security, and international anti-crime groups. Their mission was to map every move of RH Acquisitions and its subsidiaries, track currency, identify goods, and understand why everything led back to the same name. During a raid on a suspected transit safe house in a Henderson suburb, agents discovered a locked file cabinet containing a brown envelope labeled RH Acquisitions Invoices. Inside was a series of invoices, including one noting ID 1874, handling fee for 15-year-old female, limited English. It was the moment investigators realized each invoice wasn't just a financial record, but a trace of a human life. The pattern became clearer as subsequent transactions matched missing person reports for over 60 cases. Records were cross-referenced, with 21 cases perfectly matching dates, locations, ages, and descriptions with money transfer logs bearing the signature RKH, Rick Harrison's initials. This was no coincidence. It was a blueprint and the clearest evidence. From May 2022, the FBI deployed covert surveillance. Phones linked to Rick were wiretapped under court order. In less than 6 weeks, they recorded over 70 encrypted calls using terms like Item 63, good condition, no history, high value, and transfer port cleared. Though disguised as antique trade language, linguistic analysts later confirmed the terminology mirrored international human trafficking networks. The picture gradually emerged: a famous TV entrepreneur, publicly a figure of authority, secretly running a sophisticated underground network where each victim was transported like cargo. And it all began with a girl named Jenna Morales, whom the world might have forgotten if not for a stray note in a misaddressed invoice, Item 1874. The question was no longer whether Rick was involved, but who else was complicit. How many victims went uncounted, and how such a system evaded detection for 5 years. Yet before those answers could surface, one final piece of evidence awaited discovery. A notebook hidden behind a soundproofed wall in a storage warehouse containing silent confessions, cold statistics, clinical descriptions, and Rick Harrison's signature at the bottom of each page. The physical evidence and the emergence of this criminal notebook were among the most critical pieces in the entire investigation into Rick Harrison. Nothing was more terrifying or deeply unsettling to investigators than the black leather-bound notebook found in a small warehouse in Las Vegas's East Sahara Avenue industrial area. This notebook was not just a document. It was the ultimate reflection of every excuse, a mirror revealing the harsh reality behind the cherished image of a TV personality once beloved across America. The warehouse where the notebook was found was legally owned by a shell company named Antique Brokerage and Consulting LLC, one of the companies Rick Harrison established. According to company records, it was used as a storage facility for perishable artifacts of high cultural and historical value. However, when a federal task force executed a special search warrant in July 2023, they found no real treasures. Instead, there were racks filled with items of unclear origin, peeling paintings, clocks without hands, broken cameras. The entire space felt like a meticulously staged, sophisticated, deliberate, and entirely fabricated scene. An investigator happened to notice that at the end of the warehouse hallway, where the building's original blueprints showed no storage room. Using wall-thickness measurement devices and thermal sensors, they detected a double wall lined with soundproofing and signs of manual installation. After removing plywood and insulation layers, they uncovered a narrow concrete compartment, less than half a meter deep, containing a single item. A black leather-bound notebook, unlocked and unboxed, covered in a thin layer of dust, indicating it hadn't been touched in years. The moment the first page was opened, the Rick Harrison case shifted from merely complex to utterly shocking. Each page contained meticulously handwritten notes in black and blue ink. Each line documented a transaction, not of antiques or rare paintings, but of people, age, gender, nationality, personality traits, and destinations. The notebook logged 230 entries, corresponding to at least 230 victims treated as transport units, never using real names. Only identification codes like 6318, cold numbers recorded by a hand that never wavered. It was the dispassionate tone throughout the notebook that stunned investigators. Rick Harrison didn't write like someone hiding to avoid detection. Instead, each entry exuded the calm confidence of a system operator, accustomed to control, to the point that the notebook read like a financial ledger or an executive's internal diary. It wasn't written to conceal, but to assert power. The FBI's legal division immediately sent the notebook to a lab. Handwriting analysis confirmed with 100% accuracy that every stroke matched Rick Harrison's writing samples, from contract signatures to personal letters spanning years. Pressure analysis and consistent metrics showed the writing was natural and unforced, not a forgery. On the final page, a hand-drawn diagram revealed the entire organizational network, recruiting victims in Eastern Europe, moving them under fake passports through Serbia, entering the U.S. via cultural visas through Canada, and then distributing them to transit points in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. Locations were coded, transporters labeled, and delivery points prioritized. Victims were categorized by age, health status, English proficiency, and compliance level. The notebook didn't just document the past. It was an operational blueprint for the entire human trafficking enterprise. At the trial, the prosecutor described the notebook as irrefutable evidence, impossible to explain away or silence. When it was introduced, the courtroom fell completely silent. One juror left their seat, unable to bear the details. Another wept upon reading an entry describing a 13-year-old girl sold to Asia, annotated as premium, no history, healthy. When questioned about the notebook, Rick Harrison remained silent. No denial, no admission. His defense attorney argued he was exploited and the notebook could have been forged. But the handwriting was verified. GPS data and victim disappearance timelines matched perfectly. And the notes fully corresponded with over 30 leaked emails from the internal system of Rare Find Logistics, a shell company Rick secretly owned through 3 entities in the Cayman Islands. This notebook was not just incriminating evidence. It was the operational ledger of a criminal empire, not stored on any server, never leaked online, but handwritten as a declaration of power. Like many dictators, Rick trusted his own records above all else, and that trust became his life sentence. From the moment the notebook surfaced, the case was no longer a question. It became an undeniable truth, sealed in blue ink on yellowed pages, written by the man once celebrated as the king of the pawn shop on reality TV. Henceforth, Rick Harrison's name would no longer appear on pawn shop signs or best-selling book covers, but would be tied to federal criminal records, alongside those sentenced to death for orchestrating human trafficking and crimes against humanity. The 5 closest witnesses. If the black leather-bound notebook was the physical evidence that convicted Rick Harrison, the testimonies of those closest to him became the moral evidence that made the case irreversible. In any trial, when those who once called the defendant father, brother, or family testify, the truth ceases to be a mere investigative report and becomes a direct blow to the image the defendant painstakingly built. In Rick Harrison's trial, that blow came from two people, Corey Harrison and Austin Chumlee Russell, his biological son, and his most trusted on-screen companion. When Corey Harrison stepped into the courtroom, the atmosphere grew heavy with shock. The confident, humorous image of the man on television was gone. Instead, Corey appeared pale, with sunken eyes, walking slowly, his hands trembling as he approached the witness stand. He was no longer the cheerful son in the public's eyes. He was a witness carrying familial love and deep-seated anger. When the prosecutor asked, "Who are you?" Corey hesitated before answering, "I am Corey Harrison, son of Richard Kevin Harrison." His voice broke as if interrupted, and the courtroom fell silent. Corey recounted that since 2019, his father's behavior had grown increasingly strange. Secret meetings after closing hours, doors locked from the outside, things that had never happened before. One night, I went to the shop near midnight to retrieve my laptop, and I heard crying, like that of a child coming from the back storage room. I knocked, but no one answered. The next day, I asked my father, and he just looked at me and said, "Don't ask questions you can't handle the answers to." That was the first time I was truly afraid of him. From then on, Corey was sidelined from operations, stripped of access to internal accounts, and barred from the appraisal room Rick had soundproofed. One day, he accidentally opened a misdelivered shipment and found a box containing documents and photos, not of antiques, but of young girls, each image annotated with identification codes and conditions. When Corey confronted his father, Rick simply said, "Close it and forget what you saw." Corey fled his father's house that very night, cutting off all contact, withdrawing from the show and the business. The media attributed his disappearance to brand disputes. No one knew that behind his silence was a secret haunting him daily. At the trial, when cross-examined by the defense attorney, Corey was asked if he fabricated his testimony due to father-son conflicts. But Corey only looked at Rick, sitting less than 3 meters away, and replied, "I'm not making this up. I'm recounting the nightmare I can't erase from my mind. I didn't want to believe the father I respected could do such things. But he never denied it. He stayed silent, and that silence is his answer." The courtroom fell deathly silent as Rick stared straight ahead. Unlike Corey, Austin Chumlee Russell had no blood relation, but had been Rick Harrison's companion for over 20 years, from before the cameras started rolling for Pawn Stars. Chumlee was the source of laughter, clumsy but lovable, often tasked with menial jobs, but winning over audiences with his sincerity. However, when Chumlee entered the courtroom, the familiar humor was gone. His face was darkened, rigid, and cold. He was no longer the mocked sidekick, but a witness bearing the weight of truth. Unlike Corey, Austin Chumlee Russell doesn't have a blood relation to Rick Harrison, but he has been close to him for over 20 years, dating back to before the cameras started rolling for Pawn Stars. Chumlee was the one who brought laughter, clumsy yet lovable, often tasked with menial jobs, but he won the audience's affection with his sincerity. However, when Chumlee stepped into the courtroom, the familiar humor was gone. His face turned grim, stiff, and cold. He was no longer the butt of jokes, but a witness, carrying the heavy weight of the truth. Chumlee testified that years earlier, he thought Rick's actions were just shady business deals, tax evasion, or legal loopholes. Nothing serious. But from 2018, he began witnessing things he couldn't explain. Some nights, Rick came to the shop at 2 or 3 a.m., always with the same driver and a white van parked out back. They brought in sealed wooden crates with no labels. Afterward, Rick would call someone, always using the same phrase. "Item 27 is in storage. Handle with care." Once, Chumlee joked, "Is item 27 an alien artifact or something?" Rick didn't laugh. He looked straight into Chumlee's eyes and said, "Don't joke about things you don't understand." Chumlee said that moment gave him chills. One late night in 2021, as he was heading home, Chumlee heard banging and a child's cries coming from the back storage area. When he reported it the next morning, Rick coldly replied, "You heard wrong. If you're smart, don't mention this again." The incident haunted Chumlee for years, leaving him in agony, torn between loyalty and suspicion, between humor and nightmares. But when the notebook was brought to light, he could no longer stay silent. "When I saw the codes and notes in the notebook matching what Rick had said over the radio, I realized I had turned a blind eye to a crime, and I couldn't carry that guilt to the grave." In court, when cross-examined, the defense attorney tried to undermine Chumlee's credibility by bringing up his 2016 drug case, but Chumlee didn't back down. "I made mistakes, but I have never witnessed a person being treated like merchandise, and when I saw that, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Both Corey and Chumlee, each with different pasts and roles, shared one thing in common. They once cherished Rick Harrison, and now they were the ones bringing him to light. After their testimonies, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. This was no longer a case about ledgers, money, or conspiracies. It was a tragedy of betrayal, of a father figure and boss who had corrupted those closest to him into victims of silence, deception, and fear. As the trial entered its final phase, the public began to grasp a deeper truth. Rick Harrison's crimes weren't just legal violations. They were crimes against humanity. And one by one, people were standing up. Human trafficking is a hidden crime. But the money it generates always finds a way to surface, clean, legal, and untraceable. In the system Rick Harrison ran, human exploitation went far beyond soundproofed rooms or midnight shipments. It was a sophisticated financial money laundering chain, where every dirty dollar was cleansed through fabricated legitimacy. This was a meticulously built, multi-layered, and fully disguised money laundering system, masquerading as what the public believed to be legitimate business. The prosecutors described Rick's money laundering network as one of the most systematically and technically designed systems they had ever seen, operated by an individual with no formal background in finance. At the core of this system was a series of shell companies, mostly registered in Nevada, Delaware, and the British Virgin Islands, 3 jurisdictions notorious for lax corporate regulations, both in the U.S. and internationally. Each company served a specific purpose. One received funds, another transported goods, another logged expenses, and yet another masked transactions for physical items. The model Rick employed was layered transactions, obscuring the money trail through multiple layers. For example, a $85,000 payment was transferred from a European collector's account to Golden Ledger Holdings, one of Rick's shell companies, recorded as payment for a 19th century African tribal mask. However, this item never appeared in any appraisal transactions or display records at the pawn shop. After receiving the funds, the company transferred them through two other entities, listed as storage rental fees and transportation costs, and finally reinvested into art capital. Within 72 hours, the initial sum had been fragmented into 5 smaller transactions, passing through 3 different banking systems, including a branch in Cyprus and a private bank in Dubai. By this point, the money was nearly untraceable and could be withdrawn as legitimate income. Another method Rick used was casino money laundering, exploiting casino activities to legitimize cash. According to records from the Nevada Financial Control Agency, Rick conducted at least 37 high-value chip transactions over 14 months, totaling over $350,000. This method was straightforward. Rick would buy chips with cash, play low-limit games for a short time, and then cash out the chips as winnings, now legitimate and below the federal reporting threshold of $10,000 per transaction. Prosecutors highlighted a typical month, November 2021, when Rick withdrew cash from 5 different ATMs within 48 hours, each time exactly $71,400, totaling $37,000. Each withdrawal was below the alert threshold, but collectively, they revealed a classic cash dispersal pattern often seen in gang or drug trafficking networks. Rick also used an unexpected tool: art. The art market has long been a haven for money laundering due to its arbitrary pricing and lack of source verification. A painting merely needed to be labeled as valuable art and appraised by an independent expert to legitimize a $100,000 transaction without scrutiny. In the case file, a 1914 Picasso sketch was sold for $120,000 through Rare Acquisition Consulting. Upon inspection, experts discovered it was merely an internet print, artificially aged with tea and sandpaper. The gold and silver pawn shop also served as a money transfer hub. Many items featured on the show were purchased at exorbitant prices, never resold, never listed in inventory, and had no related transactions. Investigators concluded these items were masks for money transfers. A watch appraised at $65,000 was actually worth less than $3,000. This transaction was executed to legitimize an electronic transfer to a human trafficking partner in Eastern Europe. Even more chilling was the system's connection to real estate, where storage facilities and dark rooms were disguised as commercial properties. A building in Henderson was purchased for $190,000 and resold within 3 months for $465,000 to a Malaysian company linked to a global child exploitation network. The building was never used. It existed solely to stage fictitious transactions, a common price inflation technique in real estate money laundering. A particularly dangerous aspect was the system's transnational integration. According to analysis from the Federal Tax Investigation Agency and Interpol, at least 12 countries were involved in the money trail, from Singapore, Romania, Serbia, Belgium, to the United Arab Emirates. Each country played a role as a link, a money recipient, a transit point for people, and a legitimizer of documents. At the trial, when the money flow map was presented, a massive chart with arrows, dates, and transaction codes, one name sat at the center: Rick Harrison. He was not just the initiator, but the organizer, like the CEO of a multinational corporation with subsidiaries specializing in storage, transportation, appraisal, payments, and Eurasia. A Justice Department financial expert concluded unequivocally, no one could create this system by accident. It was the result of a detailed blueprint, optimizing legal loopholes and maximally exploiting personal fame to conceal traces. Rick Harrison had turned money laundering into an art form. Thus, the entire television empire, from jovial haggling to humorous transactions on the reality show, was merely the surface of a hidden criminal ecosystem, sustained by silence, fame, and money. The final day of the trial arrived in the cold, dry air of January in Nevada. Nearly 11 months had passed since Rick Harrison's arrest. Nearly 10,000 pages of case files, 97 hearings, 43 witnesses, and 4 victims had been brought before the court. The trial had reached its conclusion. But no one in the courtroom that day thought they were only judging one man. Everyone understood that Rick Harrison represented a system where crimes didn't need to hide in the shadows but could thrive openly under the bright lights of television. The courtroom was utterly silent as the presiding judge stood. Before him was not just a verdict, but a statement. After reading the full list of charges, from human trafficking, money laundering, unlawful detention, to operating an organized criminal enterprise, he declared, "Given the severity of the crimes, the number of victims, and the undeniable evidence, the court sentences Richard Kevin Harrison, also known as Rick Harrison, to death by lethal injection." There was no applause, no cheering, only a heavy sigh from the back row, where the family of one of the victims sat quietly in tears. Rick sat motionless. He said nothing. Since the day of his arrest, he had never offered an excuse, never objected, never shown remorse. Perhaps because he knew words would be meaningless when the evidence included a notebook in his own handwriting, a detention room built beneath his office, and financial transactions bearing his signature. The media broadcast the verdict live. Major newspapers ran the same headline: "Pawn Stars Rick Harrison from TV hero to death sentence." A wave of public outrage erupted on forums. Many criticized society's leniency toward celebrities and the entertainment industry's apathy in ignoring warning signs. A question echoed across commentary programs: how could this go on for years without anyone knowing? Congressional hearings in the U.S. followed. A group of lawmakers proposed a bill requiring expanded background checks for television companies and independent entertainment firms. The United Nations Human Rights Council issued a formal request for further investigation into the international network linked to the Rick Harrison case. What began as a criminal trial had become a global case, one involving the abuse of power, media, and commerce. But above all the legal, political, and institutional reverberations, it was Rick's fans who suffered the deepest wound. They didn't just lose a beloved TV show. They lost an icon and had to face the harsh reality that even under the brightest lights, a darkness more terrifying than any crime they'd ever known could persist. The story of Rick Harrison is not just the downfall of a celebrity. It is a stark warning about how power, fame, and media can conceal horrific truths. Behind every smile on television may lie a silence that has persisted for years. Thank you for watching this video. The secrets revealed in the trial not only changed how we view Rick Harrison, but also unveiled a deeply dark story behind the glitz of television. Keep following for the latest updates. See you in the next one.